We're back with Jean-Michel Blais, who is the composer of his newest album, Aubades, which he's going to tell us a little bit more about now. So we were talking about, the fact that the music and background and the ambiance of your albums, which are just amazing, and that you were saying, it's not always about having the perfect studio and soundproofing. Sometimes it's nice to have natural sounds that sort of influence the music. Tell us a bit more about what, for people who don't speak French or Canadian French, what does Aubade mean?
Okay, so Aubade, it's like the way I would say the fastest is like aube in French is like the sunrise in the morning. Is it the dawn? I think in English the word for that. So it's like it's this word didn't go through history like serenade did. So serenade, serenata, sera, buonasera, serenata. It's the song of the night somehow, and Aubade is like the music of the morning of the. I think the history is like you had a nice night with someone, and then when you leave in the morning, you just sing a little song because you left through the window, and then you sing a little goodbye song, thanks for the night and everything that happened, and then you move away. So that's this moment. So the idea why I choose that word, I found that word, and I've got it's all like somehow like pandemic related, but I became like a robot, I think, during the pandemic. I was like, okay, I'll need to be in the survival mode, and I don't know, I started like doing sport, learning Russian, and composing this album. I was waking up super early, and I really was filled with morning light and energy so much. And I've been through like this whole cycle of seasons here that affect us so much. And it was just so beautiful. And I was so inspired by this, my like morning runs in the parks, especially when the city was all shut down. It would suddenly, you would see, you can imagine like in 20 years, if there are no human, nature takes over the whole city. It's goodbye, like human creation. And it's just beautiful to see animals coming back and like everything blossoming. And I felt like I was blossoming myself. And I was connecting with this old era studying in conservatory. They really want you there to be like a highly professional pianist interpret. So there was few space for someone like me who was more interested into like improvising and maybe composing and maybe playing other instruments and maybe writing for other instruments. So I was like, maybe that's the time now. I have this probably a year in front of me. Why not learning to write for other instruments? Especially I was alone here, so I was like creating all those imaginary friends. And I started with this huge orchestra in my mind. And then I was like, maybe I need to scale it down to be more realistic about it. And I slowly started writing and like imagine what are my favorite instruments. And I bought that book online that taught me how to orchestrate and arrange. And slowly I made it. And I ended up somehow with Philip Glass's assistant in Brooklyn who helped me finishing like the arrangements. Because at one point I was like, does this make any sense if it's eventually played by someone? Because it was really more like it was self-teaching, like a university class about orchestration, and it ended up, well, if it's good, then maybe I can share it. If it's not, I've learned something at least. When you work from home, or like when you learn from home, like my friend, still teacher, they're like, kids don't learn anything. Like they see them after they're supposed to be at this, the level decreases. It's not working. Like
it's as our masks with the deaf people and people that have issues trying to communicate, autism, everything. But it's good to know that people like you are still being creative and finding ways to be creative. So that's one of the main things. So you were saying about how it really inspired you, in a way.
But I mean, I've been through a moment like at the very downest moment was like, okay, am I gonna make music ever again, and how and what is, and I'm fine with that because I have a life before and I can have a life after, and I'm a quite resilient person. And then I went to the very bottom and I'm like, okay, I signed with those labels and I owe them this amount of albums. I'm like, at worst case scenario, I live from that money and I just write albums. And I'm like, okay, that's the worst case scenario, which is an amazing scenario. So that's where I focus. I was like, okay, if that's it, well, I'll spend the next 4 years here writing like 4 albums, I don't know, and just like coming out with that, and then I'll see what happens next. So but it was my brain was hurting. Like it was really like a mind and like enlargement to have to think about like, I don't know, like 12 instruments at the same time, who does what and how, and it was so abstract, and that's nothing compared to people are writing symphonies. And my writing is so problematic, and like it's so, I don't know, simple, and I did my best, you know. Now I'm ready to start over. It's often the case after like a whole process of learning and producing something. I really often feel like at the very end, I'm like, now I'm ready to start, but I needed to go through all of that to,
Right.
yeah. So, and what changed something is the day I had the actual like sight reading session with. We hired instruments. We went to this my favorite studio here in Montreal, and we sight read, played the pieces, and that was like, I hadn't heard like live music in a year and a half, and I had all those human beings like in the same position. It was their first gig, and we were all there with masks, but no, because you can't. It's hard to play a flute with a mask, so basically everyone like had to quit. And then we were all there, like unveiling this music. That's one of the most, I guess, vulnerable day of my life, because I was in front of like those highly trained classical musicians that they sight read something I've spent a year working on, and they work with the best orchestras here in Montreal. And I was like, sorry guys, it's so simple. And it's from my heart. And I really worked hard to make it that the orchestra is not a mere background to make. It's too often the case. I find like you have an artist like accompanied by like a string quartet, but string quartet is more like a background tapestry to make the single artist shine. And I'm like, I'm more of like a communist, and I want everyone to have equal parts. Everyone has a solo. Everyone has movement, and I'm just part of it. And if I'm there, it's interesting. Sometimes people are like, "But where are you?" I'm like, "I'm everywhere, and I'm nowhere." I mean, I've composed the whole thing, and I'm also the pianist in it. But it was this shift that was really interesting. I spent that day crying. It was just so beautiful and so intense to see them playing. And when I came back home, I switched the instrument names for their names, because I was like, it's not an oboe.
That's nice. Yeah, it's more
Jean-Luc.
personal.
It's someone, and it inspired me. You know, like I said, because during the practice, I could hear them existing as human beings. Like, this is what we need to show. A bit like the kids working outside. You said in at Claritat, like. I was like, what about, because usually the way you would record an orchestra, you would like put mics a bit above and try to capture the ensemble. And this is a very cold way to do it. It's like I'm sitting in the perfect sounding venue, and I'm like meters away from the mass that is presenting me something. I'm like, what if we put closed mics to everyone? And now what you do is like, you really hear the flute breathing, and you hear the click on the oboe. And I'm like, I want to hear those people. And sometimes, you haven't heard the whole album, but you'll see like sometimes you hear the conductor like counting down, or like the musicians like confessing stuff to each other, like stuff happening, because that's
cool.
That's what it is. Like
really bringing the experience.
They're laughing. They're like, because that's what is to me. That's what an orchestra is, or a chamber orchestra in that case, and it's not only. So it's not only the final product, but it's also somehow involving the process.
Talking about what life lessons would you you know now that you wished you knew when you started the process, with like for the orchestra, this album, or just as a composer?
Wow, I don't know. And life is so surprising. It changes all the time. It feels like every time you set a hack, it's not working after that. It's changing. So what do you want? A life hack, or like a composition hack, or like a more about this album hack? The three of
All
them?
three. Go for it.
My life hack so far is that I think it's that you can't hack life, because life is always hacking you back. I think there's no way. And at the moment where you feel you understand, you'll be surprised. And at the moment you feel like it's never going to work again, something totally unexpected happen. And at the moment you feel everything's going right, there might be some bad stuff happening. And there's this Nietzsche quote, I can't remember, but the idea was like, life is also, to live is also to suffer. It's everything. And we tend so much to focus on happy and beautiful and all that. And I understand, because it's less suffering and it's nice. But sometimes we need to accept that you can be upset and you can cry and you can have a nice moment, like a bad moment, and this is all part of the experience. It's so hard because no one wants that, but I think it makes a richer life, and it makes you living, like you said, something like
salt makes things sweet. Salt makes things sweet. That's it's an Irish kind of quote, is that without the salt you wouldn't taste the sweetness as intently.
That makes sense.
So that's a great that's a great LifeHakx quote. Is the idea is that don't expect everything to come easily or naturally or perfectly, because in actual fact it's that little bit of imbalance that makes things better, that little bit of chaos. And that's some lovely hacks. And I wanted to ask a quick question. So I have been speaking to others, and also just from listening to your style and the way you do things, you've been compared to Chili Gonzalez, and because of your delicate playing. And I mean, it is beautiful. If anyone has a chance, please go online and look at the way he plays. He's just the most delicate, wonderful way of movement. But also you've been compared to Aubades. Who are your favorite composers and why?
I think I'm Chile is a very important influence because he was there before us all, I would say. I think the major figure is Jan Tiersen in France, that really made something very interesting and helped with the Amélie film. Like, he really brought this interest for piano instrumental music, and I think Chili Gonzalez brought a lot to Niels Fram from Berlin also, who's more like experimental. Except this, I of course I listen to like all my contemporaries and everyone, but what I rarely feel inspired by, because it feels like we all do the same thing somehow. Sorry to say that, but he's like, he's huge and he's doing like so nicely his stuff, and there's so many people like that, but I'm much more influenced by French composers like Debussy and Ravel, and Russians like Rachmaninoff, and I don't know, Bach's been a big influence for this album. And also I listen to a lot of electronic music since I lived in Berlin. You sort of need to like it, and love traditional music from like Celtic, or Andean music from South America. Like I got a bunch of like a lot of pop and like bad stuff also. I love bad music. I love it so much. In this world, I think, and I'm also slowly thinking I'm starting to emancipate from that, but there was a huge paradigm of minimalists, so like Philip Glass, somehow Steve Reich, and romantic, so like all influenced by Chopin, Schubert, composer. That's a bit the realm we're working with now, which is sadly so tiny compared to everything that's existed in music, or at least in classical music. So I really take from everywhere, and what I love to see is that often when I compose, I said earlier, like it's just like a mishmash, like a mixed of past influenced, and sometimes I'm playing something and like, oh, this chunk is from Edith Piaf, but it somehow merges with Radiohead, merges with Rachmaninoff, and with like the Celine Dion pop song I heard yesterday, and it's just like this, because it's all linked. Like, basically, I have 88 notes to make sound out, and I have other tones, instruments, and I can mess around with them and have subtones, like higher ones, but it still comes back to it. And I could go microtonal and whatever and shift, but there's a sense of harmony, of rhythm, of melody that speaks to the people I speak to, like our culture, I would say, and also in this more cultural appropriation sensitive world, it's tricky to just take like an quote like Asian melody and own it, or like an Arabic sounding. I'm really conscious about where my influences come from and how to use them. So it's also So if I'm back to those pianists again, I think Satie was a good influence. I can keep on forever. The idea is not to name drop. The idea is to show how we're contemporary humans, and sometimes you shift through your TikTok and your Instagram, and then something is striking you, and often I see that so often now. People like they don't even know who the original composer of things are. I can be conservative and be like upset and sad about it, but I can also be, isn't it beautiful that music in this
flows
case
forever through
forever
time.
beforehand, like, you know, Bach would probably be accused nowadays to have stolen so many themes from people around him in the street, and because back then it was more like everything belongs to God and my job is to take that over and give it to God. So the idea of copyright, that's very contemporary, like it's this, like it's like neo-colonization of musical ideas, and that was not existing back then. Or at one point when you feel your creation is strong enough, but still you need to have room and openness to for change in it. Like if it's too advanced in the process and you show it to someone that says it's bad or whatever about it, and you can't move it, then you will just be frustrated and sad. It happened to me once, and that piece went right to the garbage, and is in the garbage. I still keep it, but it will never come out because I feel like I've been hurt by someone's reaction to it. But basically,
how do you deal with that? Because like with critics, like that is, I think, the biggest thing that stops creative people from being creative, which is the fear of criticism or taking it too personally for a piece. So how do you deal with that?
It took me 30 years to accept to put out my first piece, to know that not everyone would like it, like to know that it's a human thing. It's just like it takes maybe 30 years to accept that not everyone's gonna like you the way you are, and some people get it at 12-year-old, right? But it took me a while, but at the same time, I have my little group. What I do, like my LifeHakx thing, is just like I have this little group of person every time I release an album, way before, when I'm quite advanced in the process, but there's still movement. I have this little group of people I show the music, and it's like my dad, who's, if he's bored with a piece, he will fall asleep or leave the room. Just not to be bad. It's just like it's just like he's bored. He's waking up. Oh, no, I'm just gonna make a coffee, and I'm like,
that's it.
I know, and I take it personal, and I have those like musical geeks that will tell me, wouldn't it be better if the mix in the high mid would be a little bit lower, and then it changes everything. We had problem with strings on the album, and my friend Marc-André just came with this. He had this little plug-in. It was like, it's like softens all the strings, and it saved so many problems. One idea, this guy, and another friend who's more like, this friend who's heard everything before, and he's just like, doesn't it sound like this and this? Back to this copyright idea. There's some people, and that needs to show early in the process, because if you create a whole piece around something and you haven't seen that you're so close from an influence you didn't see or you didn't want to see, then you're like, oh. And usually when it happens to me, I tend to encompass and recognize and quote it. Like, happened to me in my piece called Roses, that at one moment it's so close to Rachmaninoff's second concerto, second movement. It's a little chunk that's been taken by Eric Carmen for his piece All by Myself, that's being sung, and I've known through Céline Dion. And it's so close that what I did at this moment, I literally quote the concerto and I added a sample of an orchestra playing it. So you hear it and you're like, it's odd. It really sounds like something I know. Oh shit, maybe he stole the idea. And it was like, oh, he's conscious of it, and he's affirming it. And I think there's at one point it's okay to recognize and quote. We've been quoting forever in music, but that was my, I guess, humble reaction to it, rather than hiding it or like putting that piece to. So I think that's this working process and like involving the right people at the right time, and that's probably what's tricky, because I have one of my friend Devin who helps me with everything. I will come to him like, just like he was here 2 days ago. I went in the studio, I improvised 100 piece in one day. I don't know how I did that. It just like came with like so much stuff. And then we listened to them all to select if there are maybe 20 interesting in it. I always come to him and was like, here I have those 300 little excerpts. What is the next album? Like, I produce too much, and I lack sense of reducing. That's my problem. And sometimes like, yeah, but that's old Jean-Michel, that we've heard, that's boring. What about you develop this? I want to hear more of that. Like, this person is what I need to complete. And some other people maybe might be the opposite. They might come too restricted, and they need someone to open them and say, like, explore. They will take a year with like 3 pieces, and I'm the total opposite of that. But I need someone to help me create an direction. So it's a huge teamwork, and this album especially, because like I said, this first album, it was Devin, the guy I just talked to you about, Devin Bate, and I, here at home, former home, and with my like a taped mic. This album with I don't know how many people worked on that. 50, I don't know, like it's just so many people, huge teamwork to make that happen during COVID, moreover. And it's beautiful. Like suddenly I feel like I'm just like a place in time where and through which people and ideas connect, and even from like an economical point of view, like I'm, I guess, recognized at some point by the people, by fans, but by the government too, that give me money and like and the grants and all of that. And just I'm more like I can give people jobs, so like and creative jobs. This video clip you'll see for Passepied, it's amazing. There's so many people who worked on that, and I'm like, it's beautiful. Like this piece was not even supposed to exist because I was too shy to show it. And that day at the site reading, I showed it, and the musicians were like, "It's amazing. It's unplayable."
It's my favorite.
I had to rewrite it. It was impossible to play, and it ended up in that. So this back and forth sense of humility. It's tricky. I guess you spend a whole life to find the balance, but so far it's doing great. And again, like I'm here doing the interview, but there should be like probably 100 person beside me also. Yeah.
Well, that's wonderful advice. I mean, it is tricky, especially finding the right balance with friends, but like maybe just opening up one's instinct or intuition, being able to know when the person is just being miserable or just, or if they really genuinely feel something, and being able to take that feedback is so important, but also to continue to be creative regardless. So for our listeners and those who are watching, for more information about Jean-Michel, go to jeanmichelblais.com. That will be on our LifeHakx website as well, lifehakx.com with a K and an X. He also is available on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And we look forward, and he's already released at least 3 songs, I believe, from his new album, Passepied, which is like the best. And also, there's 2 other ones you've released as well?
There's one that just came out yesterday. Yeah, Nina. Oh, sorry. Yeah, Murmur and Do. And Nina just came out yesterday, so it's 4 now. Yeah.
Okay, where is it available?
Yeah, so it's coming out on February the 4th, and I think it's going to be found everywhere. So I don't know, any platform, like depending where you listen to your music or where you buy your vinyls or CDs, it's technically supposed to be found everywhere on Earth. So have a listen. Yep.
Okay, wonderful. Well, as people know, all of Jean-Michel Blais' information will be on lifehakx.com. That's with the K and an X. And you can find more information about his upcoming albums and albums from the past and where his tour dates will be at jeanmichelblais.com. Jean-Michel, super excited about it, and I don't even want to put the pressure on you. When is the next album? So we'll soak in the love light of this album and enjoy it 100%, and keep tuned in to hear what you have next. Thank you so much, Jean-Michel Blais. It has been a pleasure.
Likewise.
LifeHakx.com. That's with a K and an X on Radio X.